Scott Beck starts the movie as the star basketball player of his team, with unbelievable performances to his name. But unfortunately, all good things end. His hopes get shattered when he isn't drafted into the NBA. The media do not help matters, as various channels go agog with news about his fall from grace in the world of basketball. Fast forward to the present day, Scott ends up a 39-year-old janitor at the local high school he attended. He remains single and alone. Life has not been fair to him. A stray dog, Lucy, that keeps barking outside his house wakes him up from sleep. His attempts to chase it away prove futile, as the dog refuses to leave. He watches the television as he gets ready for work, but he receives a call from the hospital with some disturbing news. His frail father has not been going in for his appointment at the hospital. When it rains for Scott, it's obvious it pours, as Mrs. Walcott, who he rents his house from, comes for her rent. Poor and barely surviving, he promises to pay her soon. He is forced to listen to her lecture about taking care of the dog. We see Ryan, the sophisticated owner of the Knoxville Silver Knights, a professional basketball team in the state, and Scott's ex from way back. She comes under fire for booting the team's two star players, famous for their misconduct and a ticking time bomb for a lawsuit. The team's coach is furious at her. He foams at the mouth as he accuses her of not seeking his consent before booting his players. Ryan complains about the team's inability to pay the players they have on board at the moment, but Coach Banks insists on his need for new players. To calm tempers down, Ryan suggests they try open tryouts. Coach Banks and Archie, a sort of advisor, frown at the laughable idea, but she insists that with their fans and social media involvement, they could land some talents. Coach Banks drops the call on her, totally insulted at her idea. This leaves Ryan sad. She realizes how difficult it is to manage the team, and she wonders if her late father would be proud of how she does it. Archie is right beside her. As he perks her up, he assures her that things will get better with the coach and the team. He reminds her of one of her father's quotes, to not be afraid of losing, as it teaches new things. This helps Ryan, as she smiles at the thought of her father. Life gets worse for Scott. His car goes off on him as he arrives at the school's parking lot. This annoys him, as he doesn't have enough money to fix it up. He enters the school to start his work, and immediately a student intercepts him on the way, asking him to assist her with her locker's combination while she points out a spoilt air conditioner. His friend Nick calls out to him. He is a Christian training to be a preacher. He uses Scott for practice and is constantly telling him about God, even though Scott doesn't share the same sentiments with him. Scott stares at him in bewilderment as Nick informs him that his car problems are all God's plans. He tells Scott of his decision to go back to seminary school and anger management classes. Scott is tired of him, as it is already his fourth attempt at trying to become a preacher, but he agrees to support him on his journey. Scott, besides being a janitor in the school, also volunteers as an assistant coach to the school's basketball team. Nick promises to speak to the school board to pay Scott for his services. He feels bad that his friend doesn't get any reward for helping him coach the boys on the team. Scott feels uncomfortable talking about taking money for coaching the kids. He disappears to start with his duties. He tries to call his father, but he only receives his dial tone. This worries him, as he knows how stubborn his father can be. He ends up leaving a message to call him. Ryan causes a buzz in the media with her announcement for Silver Knights Open tryouts, with her slogan, to put the American dream back into the All-American team. At the end of school, Scott goes to help Nick with the coaching of the team. He watches as Nick gets riled up easily. The team doesn't seem to be in a good shape, but he doesn't do much, as he only shouts out orders to the boys. He shows Scott the video of Ryan's press conference earlier in the day. Ryan and Scott were together before his fallout, but Ryan's good looks aren't what surprises him. The idea of an open tryout shocks him. Nick advises him to apologize to Ryan and take part in the tryout, but Scott doesn't think the same. He is ashamed that he is unable to face her, as his sorry is way past its expiration date, and he doesn't care about making a fool out of himself. Nick believes Scott's NBA spot was denied 20 years earlier. He advises him to take advantage of the open tryouts and regain his past glory, but Scott insists those days are behind him, as he has other pressing issues to think about. To make matters worse, his car doesn't start up by the time he is ready to go home. He has no other option but to run home. He arrives at his house, tired and panting for breath. Deny all he wants, but it's quite obvious that he is still quite hung up on Ryan, as he keeps replaying her press conference video on TV. Ryan is stuck at work as she second-guesses her decision for the team. Scott still hurts from the incident 20 years ago, and one of the boys from the team comes to him for some basketball advice. Scott advises him to have fun and quit stressing. Murphy reminds him of his younger self and his yearning to be drafted into the NBA, so he tells him what he wished he knew when he was young, not to put all his eggs in one basket. He goes off on his friend Nick for teaching the kids all about God and abundant life, when he sees only regret and hopelessness around them. He uses his life as an example of when things go wrong in people's lives. Nick goes on the defensive, as he tells him not to blame God for his bad decisions over the past years. This is the truth he doesn't want to hear, so he runs off. The boys' game does not go as planned, as they miss many chances in the first half. Coach Nick is wrought with anger and asks Scott to speak to the boys. The mood in the locker room is sad, and the lackluster speech Scott gives them does nothing to lift their spirits. When they stand to leave, he calls them back and gives them a real pep talk, which inspires the boys, and they perform better in the second half. Nick thanks him for helping out the team. He knows his friend still has it in him, and he encourages him to consider the open tryouts. Scott gets a call from the bar to come and get his drunk father. He takes him home, sad at the way his father is letting life fly past him. His father shares that he is facing some financial challenges and has given up on continuing with his hospital appointments to get a new heart. He is still affected by the loss of his wife. Scott's pop scoffs when Ryan's press conference comes up on the TV. He still has some reservations about Ryan. Scott tries to defend her, but his father advises him to forget about Ryan, because a woman of her status wouldn't have anything to do with the janitor. Oops, Pop hit a nerve there. Although it hurts him, Scott knows that his father is right. It's the day of the open tryouts, and Scott shows up for it. Like a moth drawn to a flame, he ignores instructions and finds his way to the official court, rather than the gym to practice some shots. Ryan hears some noise from the court and goes to check it out. They are both surprised when they see each other, and Scott is embarrassed when Ryan points out his age, which is older compared to the other guys who showed up for the tryouts. Scott is impressed with how well she looks, and he suffers a foot-in-the-mouth moment when he tries to compliment her. There's an uncomfortable air between them as they stare at each other, but they are saved by Ryan's phone ringing. Scott stops Ryan as he turns to leave, curious about why she looked surprised to see him. But Ryan brings him down a peg or two by asking him why she should have any thoughts of him. She leaves him standing, embarrassed, and staring at her retreating figure. The tryouts kick off in full force, and Archie raises an eyebrow when he finds Scott among the contestants. He teases Ryan about it, but she maintains that she is focused on the tryouts, and not on rekindling an old romance for the cameras. Archie doesn't relent as he points the cameras to Scott, as an indicator that drama might follow. It seems that the old Scott is still alive, as he performs incredibly well in the tryouts, which leaves the coaching crew impressed with him. Over pizza and more TV back home, Scott dashes Nick's hopes when he tells him that a relationship with Ryan is impossible, as he doesn't want to get his hopes up. This doesn't go down well with Nick, as he preaches to Scott about Jesus and refilling the half-empty glass. Ryan is having a hard time deciding on the perfect players to pick from the tryouts with the other members of the board. She is surprised when the coach hands her the basketball stat sheet of an interesting player, Scott. It's a bright church day, but Scott's car refuses to start up, so he is forced to run, and he arrives at the church, panting and looking all disheveled. Nick hands him some water and they join the service. He is touched when the pastor announces that the church is rooting for him in his tryouts. Although Nick tries to distract him from listening to the preacher, he shoves him off and pays rapt attention to the preaching. After the service, he is invited by Pastor Lawrence to visit the group he coaches in basketball. Their conversation is interrupted when Scott's phone rings. He comes back and informs Nick that Ryan called, and that she is on her way to his house. He doesn't know what to make out of it. Nick saves him from another run home as he takes him in his car, where they argue over Pastor Lawrence and his preaching. Nick seems threatened by Pastor Lawrence, and doesn't agree with how he does his own thing. They arrive at Scott's house and find Ryan already waiting. Scott rejects Nick's offer to tag along with him. She is curious about the dog that stands watch with her, but Scott has to, for the umpteenth time, clarify that Lucy does not belong to him. They walk inside and he serves her some tea. She spills the news that he has been selected for the second round of tryouts and hands him some papers to sign. Scott looks pleased with the offer. Unable to hide his curiosity, he questions Ryan if all the selected players are getting a visit from her. She looks away in embarrassment as she replies to him that it's just the ones who she almost married. Happy with her response, Scott gives her a soft smile. Ryan is curious as to why Scott, at the age of 40, is choosing to take up basketball. Scott's age is a sensitive subject for him, as he corrects her that he is still 39. She doesn't sound convinced when he tells her that he needs the money. His reappearance in her life upsets her. She still smarts from his dumping her at the altar and deserting her for a year. Scott tries unsuccessfully to wriggle himself out of Ryan's ire, but she is taking no prisoners. Tired of the back and forth, she informs him to expect more attention from the press, which translates to questions about their past failed relationship. But Scott is not perturbed about it. On her way to her car, they catch up on Nick and his attempts at being a preacher. She is curious about why Scott is so sure that he will succeed this time. Scott tells her that he won't give up too soon, like he did before. She struts over to her car, but leaves him a comment that his dog needs a bath. With a smile on his face, he informs her once again that Lucy is not his dog. At work the next day during practice, Nick sounds excited when Scott informs him that he has been selected to join the Silver Knights. He announces it to the boys. They dump practice as they surround Scott to celebrate him. Scott's energy is fired up. He continues with his practice as he prepares for the second round of tryouts. During one of his coaching sessions with the boys, they find online that Scott dated Ryan. He attempts to convince the boys that it makes no difference, but Murphy thinks otherwise. Scott dismisses the boys as he tries to get a few quiet moments to himself. A famous sports reporter who arrives at the school and asks for an interview with him disturbs his peace. Scott dislikes the idea of speaking to the press, but he reconsiders when she asks for just 5 minutes of his time. The questions are about Ryan. He gives the reporter glowing remarks about Ryan and her ability to lead the team to greater heights. Ryan watches the interview from her office as it is being broadcast. She wears a smile on her face as she listens to Scott. She looks pleased with him. She listens as both Archie and Ruby talk about Scott. They know that since Scott is no college student, he might fail at any time. They make plans to exploit the situation, now that the press is interested in Scott, to the team's advantage. The press obviously liked the story of Scott making a comeback 20 years after his last game. Although Scott was wary of the interview at first, seeing himself on TV makes him proud. He leaves a message for his father about his progress to the next round, reminding him to catch his interview on TV. He increases his practice rate, and even drags Nick to join him during his practice sessions. His relationship with his father improves. They hang out and watch old basketball clips. He also gets down to give Lucy a thorough bath. He even gets to take her to work and practice with him. It's safe to say that he considers her his dog now. Both the high school and the community regard him as a hero. He gets a pass to eat food for free at the local diner. His form improves considerably, and he is super pumped for the second tryouts. It's the day of the second tryouts. Both the crowd and sports channels are ready for the showdown. Ryan looks nervous as she ponders over Scott's fate. Scott looks a bit daunted when some players who appear bigger than they do on TV walk into the court, also seeking a spot in the Silver Knights team. Coach Banks addresses the players. It appears that he is still angry at Ryan because she interfered with his team. He expresses his displeasure about the tryouts to the players, but unfortunately, he doesn't get to make the rules. He has no choice but to defer to Ryan's instructions as the owner of the team. The competition starts, and it's a grueling and competitive second round of tryouts for the players, as they need only 3 players for the next round. Scott performs well in the speed exercise, but when it gets to throwing hoops, one of the bigger players keeps upsetting his game. It is a full-on war between the 2 players. They play, fall, and rush up, and none of them seem to want to give up. Coach Banks gets fed up with their antics on the court. He singles out Scott for a word. He mocks Scott about his old age, but Scott pays him no heed, as he is confident in his skills. Scott's impressive knowledge and skills annoy the coach. He feels like Scott is trying to teach him his job. Scott is unperturbed as he continues with his game. But Ryan is scared on his behalf that the coach might not consider him for a position in the team. After the tryouts, he approaches his car to go home. It annoys him when he finds his tires slashed and some dirty mops dumped in his car. He has made some very childish enemies at the tryouts. Ryan helps him out as she drives by and asks him to join her in her chauffeured limo. On their way to his house, she chides him for supposedly mouthing off to the coach. She informs him that he might have single-handedly ruined his chances of making it to the team, as she is incapable of affecting any decisions about the choice of players. Scott maintains that he is proud of his outburst, as he is tired of people dictating his life for him. He convinces her to come with him to see the kids play their game. They hold their breaths as the kids battle it out on the court. They end up scoring a winning shot at the sound of the buzzer. The crowd becomes awash with excitement. Without much thought, they share a hug, and an overambitious photographer in the court takes pictures of them. Ryan is impressed with Scott and his relationship with the kids, even though he tries to downplay what he does for them as an assistant coach. They take a walk around the stadium. He tells her about his father's downhill life and how he ends up working as a high school janitor. The spark between them seems to be reignited as they hold hands and stare into each other's eyes. Ryan also informs him about her life since they last met, and apparently she was married, but is now divorced. She gets emotional when she talks about the struggles she faces as the owner of the team. The money issues seem to be weighing down on her. Scott relates perfectly to her struggles. He doesn't seem too disturbed when Ryan tells him not to pin his entire future on the tryouts. He smiles over it and initiates a private moment between the two of them, until they decide that it's time for them to go home. They arrive at his house, still holding hands. Scott asks her if it's too late for literally everything, including their relationship. He wants them to continue from where they stopped many years ago. They spend the night in Ryan's car. The next morning, her phone alarm jolts them up from sleep. She finds out that their pictures from the night before have surfaced online, including the one where they kiss. This puts her in a panic, as she is in a rush to leave Scott and go clear things up. Scott doesn't understand why she is in such a rush, and he tries to calm her down, but Ryan goes on about not messing things up for the team. Before she drives off, she informs him that he made it into the final round. Scott waves at her, sad at how their time was ruined. It's official for Scott when the sports channel announces his selection, alongside 2 other players, including the big guy Clint, who gave him issues at the second tryouts for the final 2 spots on the team. Scott is doubly surprised when he attends Nick's fellowship and finds lots of students in attendance. He gets emotional when they give him a new pair of shoes for his final round. Nick gives them a lesson on life and failure. It's an emotional lesson about going through hard times, even as Christians, which leaves everyone rapt with attention. Ryan marches over to Coach Banks' office. She is furious when she learns that Scott Beck is only being stringed to the finals, without any intention of signing him to the team. Their already strained relationship doesn't even help matters, as Coach Banks threatens to resign when Ryan tries to bully him. He confirms to her that it was the intention, but he wasn't the one who made the decision. Archie interrupts their discussion. He admits that he suggested it. Ryan looks at him with disappointment etched on her face as he spins the tale of how capitalizing on Scott's story is increasing the team's revenue. He expects Ryan to be happy and proud of making it, but she surprises him when she tells him that she isn't happy with the underhanded method. She insists that Scott deserves to know the truth, as it will devastate him if he learns about it later, but Archie disagrees with her. In the next scene, it seems that Scott has been given a new lease on life, as he makes an effort to look good. Nick is surprised at his friend's change in behavior, but Scott attributes it to having a shot at life. He also thanks Nick for helping him figure out his life. Nick is touched by his admission. For him, it means he's doing well as a preacher. Ryan is confused about telling Scott about the plot or not, as she doesn't want to lose him. Ruby finds herself twiddling her thumbs and deep in thoughts of Scott, just like her father. She comforts and advises Ryan to be honest with Scott, and allow him to decide whether to continue with her, or quit the second time. Ryan isn't too sure about it. Other people's notions about Scott using her to get to the NBA has gotten to her, but Ruby disagrees. She worked with Ryan's father for a long time, so she has a front row seat to Scott and Ryan's failed relationship. She tells her that Scott merely took advantage of the NBA to get to her, because he always saw himself as inadequate. Ryan is stunned at the realization that Ruby is onto something. Scott is excited when he gets a message from Ryan to meet up. He arrives for their date early. He is now a star, as people recognize him and ask for his autograph. Ryan finds him in this position when she arrives at the cafe, but she is standoffish when their eyes meet. She cuts right to the chase and informs him that Archie will not allow him to play. That it's all a plan to make more money from the buzz his presence is causing already. Scott is disappointed that he wasted all his time thinking that he had a shot. He pays for their untouched ice cream and leaves the shop, while Ryan runs after him. She catches up to him, but Scott is angry. He accuses her that she knew all along that he had no chance, but she only wanted to use him. He doesn't allow Ryan to make a case for herself as he walks off, leaving Ryan sad about how things turned out. Frustrated at what his life has been reduced to, he clears his trophy case at the high school, while he ignores the teaching from Preacher Lawrence on quitting that continues to ring in his head. Ryan, on the other hand, does not fare better. She calls Nick in tears and tells him to check up on Scott. Meanwhile, Scott races to the church, and he cries out into the darkness, angry at God for taking away all the hope that was given to him. Nick arrives in his car, shocked to find his friend in this condition. He convinces him to join him in the car. He drops him off at his house, and Scott leaves his car without saying a word. It's a cause of concern for Nick, so he visits Pastor Lawrence for some help with Scott. Although he is reluctant, Nick convinces Scott to visit Pastor Lawrence and speak to him. He is surprised when they arrive, and he finds Pastor Lawrence coaching some injured people in wheelchair basketball. Pastor Lawrence beckons Scott to join him. He tells him about the difficulties the players face, but they remain undaunted as they still show up to play. He encourages Scott to have hope, even when it seems impossible. He meets with all the players, who seem pleased to see him. After which Pastor Lawrence leads them in prayers. Scott feels renewed after the prayers. He visits his father and convinces him to see his doctor. He advises his father to forget about the loss of his mother and start living his life again. His father breaks down in tears. It's the day for the final tryouts. The game is about to begin, but Scott is nowhere to be found. His students and friends are also gathered, and wondering about his whereabouts. Archie is furious when he realizes that Ryan already told Scott about his plot, which explains his absence, but Ryan advises him that they need to move on without him. She receives a message from Scott asking her if she wants to play horse. She smiles as she leaves in search of him. She finds him in the court. She is curious about why he is here. Scott has found his purpose in life, and tells her that he is ready to do more with his life, and not just give up. Ryan is almost in tears, overwhelmed by all that has happened, and tells him that she never used him, as she was afraid to lose him all over again. He has had time to think about it, and doesn't blame her again. He surprises Ryan when he picks up his bag, ready to go for the tryouts. She asks him why, when he knows that he will not be picked, but Scott tells her that they never know the end game, but are always guided by God. He asks her to marry him. He throws a ball to her as she stands in the court, literally and figuratively, while Ryan looks happy with the proposition. His father looks healthier and stronger as he combs his hair, getting ready to go to Scott's game while he listens to the sports channel as they announce that Scott is absent. Scott finds his way to the gym where the tryouts will be held, and the crowd erupts in cheers when they see him. He joins the other players and takes charge of his team members. He is unstoppable as he keeps sinking his balls into the net. Archie is surprised by Scott's performance. Ryan, still angry at him for his antics, replies that Scott plays this well because he has nothing to lose. Coach Banks warns Archie to stop interfering in his job when he suggests that they stop the game. Archie appears to be jealous of the attention Scott gets from the crowd and media. The final whistle is blown, and the game ends. Everyone is apprehensive as they wait for the coach to call the result. Coach Banks scores them based on their runs. Scott unfortunately recorded more than the required 35 seconds, which means he has been disqualified. It's all about the numbers. He appeals to the score and tells the coach that he can do it in less time. Coach agrees to give him another trial, but Archie shakes his head in disappointment. Scott runs again, but still doesn't reach the benchmark. His father and the rest of the crowd are disappointed. Scott still doesn't give up. He tries again, but his score isn't good enough. He spies his father, who is almost in tears and being consoled by Nick. He insists on giving it another try, and with calculated speed and determination, he runs again. The hall remains quiet, and all eyes are fixed on him. His run ends at 34.7 seconds. The timekeeper announces the time, and the crowd erupts in shouts and claps. Archie has a vendetta against Scott, as he doesn't allow him to enjoy the applause from the crowd. He announces that there are only 2 spots in the team, which are for the other 2 players who are already the favorites. The crowd boo at him, but he is nonplussed. He taunts Scott about his age and reduced strength. He suggests that Scott has a one-on-one with one of their team's players, who looks bigger and younger than Scott. The crowd boos at him again, while Ryan and Coach Banks are shocked at the type of game he wants to play. Scott's father supports him, encouraging him to accept the challenge and show off his skills. Scott stares at his friends and family in the stands. He remembers the students' dreams about who they want to be in the future, and the preachings of Pastor Lawrence. He is energized as he steps into the court and throws his longest ball. With the help of one of his team players, it lands into the net. The crowd rushes up from their seats, and the air is rent with screams of excitement. His father is unable to hide his joy. Coach Banks approaches Scott and informs him that he cannot offer him a contract as a player because the team cannot afford it, but he can offer him the position of an assistant coach in the team. The offer comes as a shock to Ryan. She never expected it from the coach, as he was never happy with the tryouts idea. Alone with Scott, she tells him yes to his marriage proposal, and Scott is excited to hear it. He has a Cheshire smile on his face as he drags her into his arms, and they share a private moment in the full glare of the crowd. Soon they are surrounded by friends and family, who share in their joy. Soon, Scott becomes the head coach of the Silver Knights at the passing of Coach Banks. Murphy gets recruited to the team, and Nick becomes the team's chaplain as he leads them in prayers before an important game. They race out to the arena. Scott spots his heavily pregnant wife, Ryan, and blows her a kiss. He looks around the stadium, happy with the buzz and noise from the crowd that surrounds him. Coming from where he was before, his life is an example that nothing is impossible for God.